Life in our small town was as predictable as the tides. I'd lived here my whole life, and everyone knew everyone else by name. My days followed a comfortable routine: breakfast at the local cafe, a walk through the village green, and afternoons working at the hardware store my father passed down to me. It was a quiet, unassuming existence, but it was mine, and I was content with that. Then, one morning, everything changed. I was heading to work when I saw a crowd gathered outside the shop. At the center was a man who made my heart lurch. A man who looked exactly like me. Same build, same face, even the same way he stood. The townspeople were abuzz, whispering and pointing as I approached. "Trent," he said, smiling like we were old friends. "It's been a long time, brother." I froze, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing and hearing. Brother? I didn't have a brother. The man's voice was calm, his expression warm, but there was something off about him, something that set every nerve in my body on edge. The townsfolk, usually so grounded, seemed taken in by him, marveling at the resemblance. But all I felt was a cold knot of unease tightening in my gut. I had no memory of this man, and yet he stood there, claiming to be a part of my life, as if he'd always belonged. At first, I tried to keep my distance, hoping the man claiming to be my long-lost twin would leave town as quickly as he'd arrived. But it wasn't that simple. He wasted no time integrating himself into my life, showing up at family gatherings, laughing with my friends, even charming my parents with stories of a past I had no memory of. They welcomed him with open arms, their curiosity and excitement overriding my unease. Soon, he started working at the same place I did, and I watched in disbelief as my colleagues began to accept him as if he'd always been there. It was as if the entire town was under his spell, and no one questioned his sudden appearance or his claim to be my twin. People started calling him by my name, mixing us up in conversation, and attributing things to me that I had never said or done. Then the oddities began. Small things at first. My keys not where I left them. A shirt I swore I'd never owned hanging in my closet. But as the days went on, the disturbances became more pronounced. Friends mentioned conversations I didn't remember having, and more than once, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, wondering if the face looking back at me was truly mine. The doppelganger's presence was slowly eroding my sense of self, blurring the lines between us, until I was no longer sure where he ended and I began. At first, I tried to ignore the unease that gnawed at me, convincing myself that I was overreacting. But as the days passed, it became impossible to ignore how much my life was changing, and not for the better. The doppelganger, who introduced himself as my long-lost twin, was everywhere. My friends started inviting him out, my family warmed to him instantly, and soon even my boss had given him shifts at my job. I watched in growing horror as he slipped effortlessly into every aspect of my life, while I found myself increasingly pushed to the sidelines. The worst part was how people started confusing us. It began with small things. Friends would mention conversations I'd never had, or they'd greet me with inside jokes I didn't understand. But then, more unsettling things happened. One evening, I came home to find the front door unlocked and my keys on the kitchen table, where I hadn't left them. My favorite mug went missing, only to reappear days later in the cupboard, filled with cold tea as if someone had just used it. Every time I confronted him, he brushed it off with a smile, his voice calm and soothing, making me doubt my own sanity. "You're just stressed, Trent," he'd say, his eyes narrowing slightly, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "We're brothers. There's no need to compete." But the line between us was blurring, and I could feel myself slipping away, losing my grip on who I was. The final straw came when I noticed my reflection in the mirror one morning. At first, it looked like me. Same eyes, same face. But then the reflection smiled. A slow, creeping grin that didn't match the panic rising in my chest. I stepped back, but the reflection stayed, lingering in the glass for a heartbeat too long before mimicking my movements again. The familiar comforts of my home became distorted. Pictures on the walls hung at slightly different angles. Furniture shifted just an inch from where it used to be, and the scent in the air was subtly wrong, like someone else had taken over the space. It was as if the world around me was being carefully, methodically replaced with something else, something that didn't belong to me anymore. My life, once so certain and solid, was unraveling before my eyes, and I was helpless to stop it. I couldn't take it anymore. The feeling of being erased, of having my life stolen from me, was unbearable. Desperation clawed at my mind as I decided to confront the doppelganger one final time. I found him sitting in my living room, his living room now, casually sipping tea as if nothing was wrong. The sight of him, so comfortable in my place, sent a surge of anger through me. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear and rage. "You need to leave. This is my life, not yours." He looked up at me with that infuriatingly calm smile, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Trent, you're not thinking clearly," he said softly, his voice dripping with false concern. "You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you've forgotten who you really are." His words twisted in my mind, sowing seeds of doubt. Was I losing it? Could he be right? I shook my head, refusing to let him manipulate me any longer. "I know who I am," I snapped, but even as I said it, the certainty in my voice wavered. The doppelganger just smiled wider, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Do you?" That night, I went to bed filled with dread, my mind a whirl of fear and confusion. When I awoke, something was wrong, terribly wrong. The room was almost identical to mine, but everything was slightly off. The colors were muted, the furniture subtly reversed, and the air felt heavy, like a bad dream. I stumbled out of bed, my heart racing as I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't in my house anymore. I was in a twisted, mirrored version of it. Panic gripped me as I ran through the house, shouting for help, but my voice echoed back, unheard by anyone. The realization hit like a physical blow. I had been switched, trapped in this parallel world where everything was wrong, where everyone would see me as the imposter. Meanwhile, the doppelganger was out there, living my life, wearing my face, and no one would ever know. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the mirror world. Somewhere in the real world, the doppelganger was smiling, victorious, while I was left to fade away into oblivion, a ghost in my own life. Life in San Francisco was steady, predictable, and just the way I liked it. My days were a comfortable routine. Mornings at the office, afternoons spent grabbing coffee with a few close friends, and evenings unwinding in my small apartment. I enjoyed the rhythm of my life, the familiar faces at work, and the quiet sense of control I had over my world. But then the rumors started. It began innocently enough. Overheard conversations at the office, passing remarks from acquaintances. "Did you hear about that guy who looks just like you? Robbed a store in the Mission District last night." I laughed it off at first, chalking it up to a strange coincidence. San Francisco was a big city after all. Doppelgangers weren't unheard of. But as the days passed, the rumors grew more frequent, more detailed. Someone who looked exactly like me was out there, committing crimes. Robberies, assaults, even breaking into homes. Friends started to ask me about it, their jokes carrying a strange undercurrent of concern. "Are you sure you don't have an evil twin, James?" I smiled, shrugged it off, but deep down, something cold and unsettling began to take root. The thought of someone out there who looked exactly like me, doing things I'd never dream of doing, it gnawed at the edges of my mind. A coincidence, I told myself. Just a weird, unlucky coincidence. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. The first time someone accused me, I was stunned. A coworker, Tom, approached me in the break room with a frown. "Why didn't you say hi to me at the pub last night? I called your name, and you just walked past like you didn't even know me." "I wasn't at the pub," I replied, confused. "I was home all evening." Tom's frown deepened, and he shook his head, clearly not believing me. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, more people came to me with similar stories. Friends were upset, accusing me of ignoring them in public, of saying things I couldn't remember. My boss even asked why I'd been seen near the scene of a burglary when I should have been at work. The worst part was the look in their eyes. Doubt, suspicion, and something else I couldn't quite place. Then I started seeing him. It was subtle at first, just a glimpse of someone who looked like me on the other side of the street, quickly lost in the crowd. But the sightings became more frequent, more deliberate. One evening, as I returned home, I saw him standing across the street, staring up at my apartment. He was too far away for me to make out the details, but I knew it was him. The next morning, I saw him again, sitting in a cafe I frequented. He didn't approach, just watched, his eyes following me as I passed. The realization that he was watching me, that he seemed to be mirroring my movements, sent a chill down my spine. I felt like my life was slipping out of my control, and the doppelganger was tightening his grip on everything that was mine. The more I saw him, the more the fear took hold. My life, once so orderly, began to unravel. I started avoiding my usual spots, ducking out of social gatherings, and dodging friends' calls. I couldn't risk running into him, couldn't bear the thought of someone confusing me with that other thing. Every time someone looked at me strangely, I wondered if they thought I was him, if they knew something I didn't. My thoughts spiraled, growing darker with each passing day. I became convinced he was trying to replace me, to slip into my life and erase me from it entirely. Sleep became a distant memory, my nights filled with frantic thoughts and nightmares where I faced him, only for him to laugh as he stole everything I had. It wasn't long before I started tracking him. Desperation gnawed at me, driving me to the brink. I began following up on the rumors, visiting the places where he'd been seen, hoping to catch him in the act, to confront him and prove, to myself if no one else, that I wasn't losing my mind. But every time he was gone before I arrived, as if he knew exactly what I was planning. I'd spot him in the distance, but the moment I tried to get closer, he'd disappear into the crowd, leaving me more confused and terrified than before. Each encounter felt like a game he was playing, with me as the helpless pawn, stumbling through a nightmare that had no end. I'd find notes in my handwriting in places I hadn't been, messages on my phone I didn't remember leaving, and receipts for things I hadn't bought. My own life began to feel foreign, as if it was slipping out of my grasp and into his. The worst part was the growing doubt gnawing at my mind. Was he really out there? Or was I just losing my grip on reality, imagining this double as an excuse for something darker, something lurking in my own mind? The line between reality and delusion blurred until I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. Fear began to consume me. Every corner I turned, every shadow I passed, I felt his presence. The doppelganger was always there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to step into my life completely. My friends had grown distant, their confusion turning into suspicion. They started avoiding me, and I couldn't blame them. How could they trust me when I didn't even trust myself? I stopped going to work, stopped answering calls. The world outside felt hostile, filled with people who couldn't tell the difference between us. Worse, I wasn't even sure if I could tell the difference anymore. Desperation pushed me to the brink. I started following the imposter, tracking him through the city's maze of streets and alleys. I needed to catch him to prove that I was real. But every time I thought I was close, he slipped away, as if he knew what I was going to do before I did. My behavior became erratic. I avoided mirrors, convinced that my reflection was somehow in on the deception. Sleep eluded me. Every creak of my apartment building or whisper of wind outside the window sounded like him, creeping closer. The more I searched for answers, the more the line between reality and delusion blurred. I couldn't tell if I was tracking him or if he was leading me, pulling me deeper into his trap. The city, once familiar and safe, now felt like a twisted game I was doomed to lose. The more I tried to cling to my identity, the more it slipped through my fingers like sand. My only certainty was that the imposter was winning, and I was running out of time. I finally cornered him in a dark alley late one night, the city's hum fading into an eerie silence around us. He stood there, a perfect mirror image of me, his expression calm and cold. The sight of him, so eerily familiar, sent a wave of nausea through me. "This ends now," I growled, my voice trembling with rage and fear. "You've taken everything from me." He didn't flinch, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "I'm not the imposter, James. You are," he replied, his voice identical to mine, every inflection and nuance perfectly matched. "I'm the real James, and you're just a mistake." The words struck like a physical blow, shaking my already fragile sense of self. But I couldn't back down, not now. "Liar!" I shouted, lunging at him, my hands reaching for his throat. We grappled in the dark, fists flying, each blow a desperate attempt to reclaim my life. He fought with a ferocity that mirrored my own. Every move, every thought matched as if we were the same person. The struggle was brutal, frantic, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Finally, one of us gained the upper hand, pinning the other to the ground, our faces inches apart. As the dust settled, only one of us rose to our feet. I, or was it him, stared down at the motionless body, our chest heaving with exhaustion. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the alley, my expression blank, devoid of emotion. The city swallowed me up once more, the darkness closing in behind me. The body left behind was indistinguishable, its identity lost in the shadows. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the chilling doubt gnawing at my mind. Was I the real James, or had the imposter won after all?
When I received the letter, I almost dismissed it as a mistake. A distant relative I'd never heard of had left me a Victorian-era mansion in the heart of Edinburgh. The idea seemed absurd, but curiosity got the better of me. The moment I stepped inside, the house's grandeur took my breath away. Towering ceilings, intricate woodwork, and dusty chandeliers that hadn't seen light in decades. It was as if I'd stepped back in time. I spent my first few days wandering the vast halls, marveling at the history contained within its walls. The air was thick with age, the creaking floorboards whispering secrets of lives long past. It wasn't until I ventured into a forgotten room at the far end of the house that I found it. A small, faded photograph tucked away in an ornate frame, hidden beneath a layer of dust. My heart skipped a beat as I wiped the glass clean. The girl in the photo stared back at me with an expression that sent chills down my spine. She was my mirror image, dressed in 19th century clothing, her eyes hauntingly familiar. The resemblance was uncanny, unsettling even. I flipped the photograph over and found a name written in elegant script: Eleanor. My great-great-grandmother, I later discovered. But there was more to the story. Eleanor had a twin sister who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The discovery left me both fascinated and uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had awakened something in the house, something that had been waiting for me to arrive. The first time I saw her, I thought it was a trick of the light. I was dusting off an old mirror in the hallway when, just for a moment, I caught a glimpse of someone behind me. I spun around, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the only reflection was mine, wide-eyed and pale. But there was something about the face in the glass that felt wrong. As I delved deeper into the mansion's history, researching the lives of those who had lived here before me, the sightings became more frequent. I would catch her in my peripheral vision, standing at the end of a corridor, watching from a window, or slipping silently around a corner. She looked exactly like me, but with an eerie, lifeless gaze that sent chills down my spine. Then the house itself seemed to wake up. Objects would be out of place when I returned to a room. Doors would slam with no breeze to move them, and I'd hear whispers, soft, insistent, calling my name. The mansion, once a grand relic of the past, now felt like a living, breathing entity, and its presence grew more oppressive with each passing day. I could feel it drawing me in, pulling me towards something dark and unknown. Every instinct told me to leave, but a stronger force kept me rooted in place, as if the house had claimed me as its own. The attic was a labyrinth of forgotten memories. Dusty trunks, cobwebbed furniture, and stacks of old letters and papers. Driven by the strange occurrences and the haunting presence that seemed to follow me everywhere, I tore through the clutter, desperate to uncover the secrets of the mansion. It was there, buried beneath a pile of moth-eaten clothes, that I found the diary. The leather was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age, but the writing inside was still legible, as if waiting for me to find it. The diary belonged to my great-great-grandmother, and as I read, the story of her and her twin sister unfolded. They had been inseparable, but the sister had died young, her life cut tragically short. She was buried in the family crypt on the estate, but the diary hinted at something far darker. A pact the twin had made with forces beyond this world, a desperate attempt to cheat death and return to the living. The entries grew increasingly frantic, detailing strange rituals and whispered promises of a life reclaimed. My hands trembled as I realized the truth. The twin spirit had been haunting this mansion for over a century, waiting for someone who could serve as her vessel. That someone was me. I could feel it now. My own identity slipping away, the boundaries between us blurring. The cold, lifeless gaze I'd seen in the mirror wasn't just her. It was a reflection of what I was becoming. She was taking over, slowly, deliberately, and I was powerless to stop it. I stumbled into the crypt, my breath ragged, the air thick with decay. The twin spirit was waiting, her form more solid now, her eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "You can't have my life," I screamed, but my voice wavered, already fading. She smiled, a cold, victorious smile, and I felt a terrible force pulling me away from my own body. In the mirror I saw her. No, I saw me, but with that same lifeless gaze, now fully in control. My hands passed through the glass as I tried to reach out, but it was no use. I was trapped, a ghost in my own home, watching helplessly as she walked away, Finally free, while I was condemned to wander the dark halls forever, lost in the mansion's twisted curse.